The West Philippine Sea Newsletter, Volume 22. Another incident in the Scarborough Shoal. The Chinese Communist Party has become predictable on the world stage, and most of the world buys into it. The Chinese had largely become non confrontational in the various sovereignty disputes they've had around the world in the month of November, most of which are in the Western Pacific, with the South China Sea and West Philippine Sea receiving a majority of the attention. The Chinese's newfound tact and restraint were not a result of an epiphany about their bad behavior being a problem. However, public perception plays a crucial role, requiring Chinese government officials to present a carefully crafted yet artificial facade before entering the global arena, and no external crisis should overshadow this charade. This explains why the Chinese were relatively well behaved in November. But now November is over, and Red Team from Beijing is back to business as usual. Chinese Premier Xi Jinping went on an international trip in mid-November to South America. The first stop was Peru. Mr. Xi's first stop was to visit the Peruvian port, where the Chinese invested $1.3 billion to create a large deep water port in Chancay as part of a Chinese program to increase the influence in the region. Mr. Xi referred to it as the, quote, 21st century maritime Silk Road, end quote, which is a component of the Belt and Road Initiative. Mr. Xi concluded his trip to Peru by participating in the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Summit in Lima. Mr. Xi then proceeded on a state visit to Brazil with its social president Lula da Silva, and then to the G20 summit in Rio de Janeiro. The last thing Chairman Xi wanted was the distraction of a clash with Vietnam, Japan, or the Philippines, where questions and comments would have followed Mr. Xi on his South American influence tour. The international media, eager to forget the recent past, is more than willing to collaborate to prevent any uncomfortable questions that could potentially embarrass the leader's fragile ego. The CCP ensures that no incidents occur to keep China out of the headlines, while the international media understands the importance of not bringing up the past. The two parties have a part to play. Now that Mr. Xi has returned to China, November has come to an end, and it's time for China's unreasonableness and aggression to resume in December. The Chinese created an international incident in the West Philippine Sea, which China claims as its sovereign territory, despite the West Philippine Sea being within the Philippines' internationally recognized exclusive economic zone, or EEZ. The incident occurred on Wednesday, December 4th, at the Scarborough Shoal. A Philippine Coast Guard ship, PCG, and a Bureau of Fisheries and Aquatic Resources, BFAR, were conducting a joint patrol to the Scarborough Shoal, which has been the most significant flashpoint between the two countries recently. An international tribunal upheld the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea in 2016, ruling against China, a decision that is since rejected. The Chinese Coast Guard maneuvered one of its ships to use a high-pressure water cannon against the much smaller BFAR ship, the BRP Dato Pagbuaya. They then proceeded to ram the ship and again used the water cannon against the smaller BFAR vessel. The PCG ship, the BRP Teresa Magbanoa, that was part of the patrol, was not subjected to water cannon or ramming, at least not this time, but was shadowed and maneuvered by the CCG and surprisingly by the People's Liberation Army Navy, the PLAN. The CCG did have 4 vessels in the shoal that were used against the Philippine vessels, and this has been a common practice. The CCG has served as the primary official agency of the CCP, China, enforcing its illegal claims over the South China Sea, with the Chinese maritime militia also playing an official role in this enforcement. The U.S. and its allies in the region have expressed tolerance towards the CCG, acting as the lead service for the Chinese, given that the CCG ships, primarily former PLAN warships, are not expected to carry weapons. The use of the PLAN to enforce the claims was to be considered escalatory. The PLAN has transitioned from not being involved in the South China Sea dispute, largely staying out of it, to taking a more active role at the Scarborough Shoal. The PLAN is still not leading the CCP efforts in the shoal, but has been present in the background and operating closer to the CCG ships in the recent past. According to PCG spokesperson Jay Terriella, 2 PLAN Type 054A frigates were on the scene during the incident, quote, blocking, shadowing, and conducting dangerous maneuvers, end quote, against the both Philippine vessels, with one PLA frigate approaching within 300 yards of the incident. The skeptic would approach the statement by Mr. Terriella as nothing more than a, quote, he said, she said, end quote, situation, but the conduct of the CCG in the past, which has been well documented, basically removed China from getting the benefit of the doubt. Additionally, the PCG demonstrated a common ability to thoroughly document this incident from the various perspectives, establishing China as the aggressor. Lin Jian, the spokesperson for the Chinese Foreign Ministry, could only provide the standard excuse that the Philippines were encroaching on, quote, China's inherent territory, end quote, and that the CCG's actions, including the ramming and using of water cannons, were part of their, quote, lawful and professional, end quote, actions. The statement continued, quote, China advises the Philippines to immediately stop its infringement and provocation and refrain from challenging China's firm determination to safeguard its legitimate rights and interests, end quote. The U.S. ambassador to the Philippines, Mary Kay Carlson, posted a mild protest to the incident on X, despite the fact that the PLAN warships were more involved in the incident than seen in the past. The U.S. and Japan and Philippines did conduct a joint naval patrol after the incident and were able to complete it without incident, but it was also not an exercise in the Scarborough Shoal where the incident occurred. The question was also posed to PCG's Jay Terriella if the Philippines could respond by sending its own warships into disputed areas to mirror of the Chinese actions. But it was not up to Terriella to respond. The Philippines government did later clarify that the Philippine Navy would not be participating. This decision was likely the best one, as both countries appeared to be avoiding an armed conflict, at least for the time being, despite the Chinese's previous threat. The Philippine Navy is unable to match the strength of the PLAN, and the Chinese ramming tactics are likely to damage the smaller Philippine ships. The Philippines' sole option is to maintain determination to resist Chinese pressure tactics and remain prepared to dispatch ships to the area, even in the face of ramming and water cannon damage, to avoid conceding China's illegal claims. The Philippines benefit from a defense treaty with the U.S., which means the Chinese cannot risk sinking a Philippine government ship or killing a Philippine Marine or sailor without risking confrontation with the U.S. A Chinese war around the Philippines is not a battle that the Chinese want to have while they are still hemmed in by the first island chain. It is, however, up to the U.S., Japan, and the regional countries to put diplomatic and political pressure against Beijing to help create alliances against CCP actions and possibly use economic tools against China as well. The Philippines cannot win a battle with China on its own, but if it is willing to take Chinese ire, its allies must find more aggressive ways through economic tools, use of soft power, or hard power deterrence. A response could also be a threat to opening more Philippine bases to the U.S. and Japan to use, which would threaten any Chinese operation against Taiwan. This option could be politically unpopular in the Philippines, however, and the ongoing political turmoil between the president and vice president in the Philippines could serve as a political distraction for this type of action. The Philippines could also adopt similar tactics as the Chinese and use gray zone tactics of its own, just as the Chinese do with their maritime militia. The Philippines, for example, can utilize its fishing fleet to maintain a presence in the region and enforce its lawful claims, while also using NGOs like ATNITO to orchestrate disruptive actions and conduct increased monitoring of Chinese activities. As long as China does not breach the first island chain, the Philippines, with its defense alliance with the United States, will remain relatively protected from the worst potential responses from China. The use of gray zone tactics would also turn the tables on the common tactic of China, but as it is an occupying power, it will be on the opposite side of the tactics. The Philippines is a free society, so any tactic that a country chooses has to have political support. One unconventional approach could be for Mr. Xi to embark on a lengthy global tour which would ensure China maintains its composure and prevent any awkward questions.